Release it. The human signed the waiver. Professor Adrian Voss said it like he was approving a lab expense, not sending a living man into a sealed room with something every creature in the building was terrified to name. Behind 9 inches of reinforced glass, the observation chamber went still. Caleb Walker heard the words through the ceiling speaker and looked up, his pale, sunburned face catching the hard white lights of the arena. He was 34, tired from a bad shuttle ride, still wearing the plain gray work jacket Earth had issued him that morning, and he had come to the Voss Institute thinking he was there to observe animal behavior from a safe distance. Now the door behind him was locked, the floor beneath his boots was cold steel, and across the room a second door began to open. "Professor," Caleb said, keeping his voice level because his throat had already gone dry. "You are making a mistake." Voss did not even glance up from his datapad. He stood tall among the alien scholars, silver-gray skin catching the glow of their instruments, yellow eyes calm with the kind of confidence only a man far from danger can afford. "That is a common phrase among prey species," he replied. A few observers made soft clicking sounds that might have been laughter. Caleb let the insult pass. He was not thinking about pride. He was thinking about exits, distance, smell, sound, and the terrible truth that there were no weapons in the room. Then the creature stepped out. The Ashmaw was larger than a grizzly, low to the ground, dark as burnt cedar, with 4 watchful eyes and a heavy head built for nightmares. Its claws scraped the floor in slow, uneven strokes. Every alien behind the glass leaned back. Caleb noticed that. Predators did not lean back unless they knew something worse had entered the room. The beast swung its head toward him and inhaled. The speakers picked up the sound, deep and wet and shaking. Someone in the observation room whispered, "It has killed 3 containment teams." Caleb did not look at them. He watched the animal's shoulders. The left one twitched wrong. One rear leg carried less weight. Its ears, or what passed for ears, were pinned tight against its skull. It was not charging. It was hurting. Caleb felt his heartbeat hammer against his ribs so hard he thought the creature could probably hear it. Back home in Montana, his father had once told him never to run from a frightened animal unless he was ready to become part of the chase. Caleb had laughed at that when he was a kid. He was not laughing now. The Ashmaw growled, and the sound rolled through the room like distant thunder. Professor Voss raised one thin hand. Observe the human response. Panic, collapse, and then predatory engagement. Caleb slowly bent his knees. The room behind the glass broke into alarmed murmurs as he sat down on the floor. Not in surrender, not in prayer. Just down, steady, open hands on his thighs, eyes lowered enough not to challenge. His breath came fast, so he forced it slower. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Easy, even though nothing was easy. "Hey girl," he said softly. "Nobody told me they hurt you." The translation system hesitated, as if it could not decide whether kindness counted as language. The Ashmaw crossed the arena. Every step sounded too heavy, too close. Caleb wanted to move. Every nerve in his body screamed at him to get up, back away, do anything. He did nothing. The beast stopped inches from his knees. Hot breath washed over his hands. A string of dark saliva fell onto his sleeve. Caleb did not flinch. "Easy," he whispered. "I see you." For one long second, the whole institute seemed to hold its breath. Then the deadliest animal in the Voss Institute lowered its massive head, pressed it into Caleb Walker's lap, and closed its eyes. 36 hours earlier, Caleb Walker had stepped off the shuttle at Voss Institute with a duffel bag in one hand, a paper coffee cup in the other, and the quiet hope that this job would be boring. The station hung above a pale green moon, all clean glass, white metal, and floating banners written in languages his translator could barely keep up with. Caleb looked around the arrival bay, took one slow sip of coffee, and muttered, "Well, this is a long way from Montana." Nobody laughed. The alien staff moved around him with the careful politeness people used when they did not think you belonged in the room. A junior assistant with soft blue skin and nervous hands led him through the main corridor, past laboratories full of sealed habitats and observation tanks. "You are the human consultant?" she asked, as if the word consultant had quotation marks around it. "That is what the badge says," Caleb replied. He held it up. "Caleb Walker, Earth Wildlife Recovery Program. Temporary Behavioral Support." She glanced at the badge, then at his worn boots. Professor Voss expected a military specialist. He got the guy who knows what a scared animal looks like before it does something stupid. The assistant blinked, unsure whether that was a joke. Caleb did not explain. Back on Earth, he had worked fires, floods, roadside rescues, bad farms, worse owners, and more angry animals than he could count. He had been bitten by dogs that later slept with their heads on his boot. He had pulled a half-starved mountain lion out of a culvert after a snowstorm. He had once spent 4 hours sitting in the dirt beside a trapped wolf because every time anyone moved too fast, the animal tried to hurt itself getting away. So no, he was not a scientist in the way Voss wanted. He did not speak in perfect charts. He did not call pain a response pattern. He just knew the difference between rage and fear, and he knew how often powerful people confuse the two. Professor Adrian Voss was waiting in the central observation hall, surrounded by scholars in bright formal robes. He was nearly 7 feet tall, silver-gray, sharp-faced, and still as a statue built by someone with no interest in kindness. His yellow eyes swept over Caleb once, from jacket to boots, and dismissed him before Caleb even opened his mouth. "This is Earth's contribution?" Voss asked. Caleb set his duffel down. "Morning to you too, Professor." A few alien researchers looked away, embarrassed for him. Voss stepped closer. "You have no advanced degree in xenobiology. No. No predator cognition doctorate. No. No containment command certification." Caleb nodded toward one of the glass habitats, where a small 6-legged creature was pacing in tight circles, rubbing the same spot on its neck against the wall. "That one has a pressure sore under the collar." The room went quiet. Voss did not turn to look. Irrelevant. Not to him. For the first time, the professor's expression changed. It was small, just a tightening around the eyes, but Caleb saw it. Voss did not like being corrected by a man with dust on his boots. "Human sentimentality," Voss said, loud enough for the room to hear. "The famous weakness of your species. You bond with anything that breathes near you." Caleb looked at the pacing creature again, then back at Voss. "Sometimes that is how we notice what everyone else missed." Voss smiled then, thin and cold. "Excellent. Perhaps tomorrow you will demonstrate that belief under controlled conditions." Caleb should have walked away right there. Instead, he picked up his coffee, took one last sip, and said, "As long as the animal gets treated like an animal, not a prop." The professor's smile did not move, but something behind it sharpened. "Of course, Mr. Walker. At this institute, everything is treated according to its classification." Caleb watched him leave and felt the first uneasy weight settle in his stomach. He had heard men talk like that before. Not aliens. Men. The kind who hurt something, then blamed the thing for reacting. By the next morning, Caleb already knew the Voss Institute had 2 versions of itself. The public version had bright hallways, polite tours, and polished plaques about ethical discovery. The real version lived behind sealed doors where the air smelled like disinfectant, stressed animals paced in circles, and every creature had a number instead of a name. Caleb stood outside Habitat Wing C with Mara Ellison, the blue-skinned assistant from Arrival, watching a handler adjust a restraint collar on a small horned animal that kept pressing its face into the corner. "How long has that one been doing that?" Caleb asked. Mara lowered her voice. "Since transport. That was 3 weeks ago." She looked at him quickly, afraid someone had heard. "Professor Voss says the behavior is adaptive refusal." Caleb kept his eyes on the animal. "Back home we call that suffering." Mara swallowed. But before she could answer, Professor Voss appeared at the end of the corridor with a group of visiting scholars behind him. He carried himself like the building had been built around his spine. "Mr. Walker," he said, warm enough for witnesses and cold enough for Caleb to hear the difference. "You are early. Animals usually are." Voss gave a thin smile. "Today's demonstration has been moved to the primary arena. The Council wants a live comparison of human empathy claims against verified predator response models." Caleb looked past him toward the secure lift. "I thought I was observing from behind glass." "You are participating in a proximity assessment." Mara's fingers tightened around her tablet. Caleb noticed. He also noticed the 2 security officers standing beside the lift, too still, too prepared. "Show me the paperwork," Caleb said. Voss lifted one hand, and a long consent document opened on the wall display. 41 pages of legal language scrolled by, full of phrases like non-lethal exposure, emergency sedation, and voluntary advisory role. Caleb read fast, the way every working man learns to read, when someone rich wants him to sign something quickly. This says I can withdraw at any time. Of course. Then I am withdrawing until I see the animal's medical records. The hallway went quiet. Voss stepped closer. His yellow eyes did not blink. Your species has a strange habit of confusing caution with authority. Caleb met his stare and felt his own pulse pick up, not from fear exactly, but from the old familiar feeling of being cornered by a person who had already decided the truth was whatever helped him win. And your species seems to confuse a lab coat with a conscience. A few scholars shifted. Mara looked down. Voss smiled again, but this time there was no performance left in it. Very well. Records first. Then your assessment. The lift doors opened. Caleb hesitated just long enough to know he should not get in, then did anyway because Mara was pale and silent, and because somewhere below them an animal was waiting that no one in this place seemed willing to see clearly. The lift dropped for almost a full minute. No music. No announcement. Just the soft hum of machinery and Caleb's own breathing. When the doors opened, he expected a viewing platform. Instead, he stepped into a bare steel chamber larger than a high school gym, with a drain channel around the floor and a wall of reinforced glass above him. The lift doors closed behind his back. Locks engaged with a heavy sound that settled in his chest. Caleb looked up and saw Voss in the observation room, surrounded by scholars. Mara stood behind him, eyes wide with apology. Caleb walked to the center of the arena, slow and careful, because panic never opened a locked door. A red light came on above the far gate. Through the speaker, Voss said, "Let us test the human theory of compassion." Caleb lifted his chin. "Professor, you are making a mistake." Voss glanced at the council observers, then back at him. "Excellent. The prey response begins before visual contact." The far gate started to rise, and from the darkness beyond it came a low, broken sound that was not rage at all. It was pain. The gate lifted with a slow mechanical groan, and the sound coming from the darkness changed the room. It was low, uneven, and rough around the edges, not the clean roar of a hunting animal showing off for dominance. Caleb had heard sounds like that before in barns after winter storms, in rescue trailers after wildfires, in the back of county trucks when frightened animals woke up somewhere strange and could not understand why the world smelled wrong. The first thing he saw was not the teeth, though there were plenty of them. It was the limp. The ash moss stepped into the light with its weight shifted away from its left side, one massive shoulder riding half an inch lower than the other. Its skin was dark and rough, almost like charred bark, and its four eyes swept the arena without settling, tracking lights, glass, vents, Caleb, then back to the gate as if it wanted out more than it wanted him. Behind the glass, Professor Voss began speaking to the council observers like he was giving a museum tour. Specimen K9 Ashma. Mature female. 940 pounds. High gravity, origin. Sound reactive. Motion reactive. Heat reactive. It responds to fear with pursuit and stillness with evaluation. Caleb kept his hands low. Does she have a name? A few scholars made that clicking laugh again. Voss tilted his head. It is not a companion animal, Mr. Walker. That is not what I asked. The Ashma's head snapped toward Caleb's voice. He stopped talking. Not because Voss had won the point, but because the animal had not. Its breathing quickened. Its nostrils opened and closed, pulling in the room, pulling in him. Caleb could feel sweat rolling down his back under the gray work jacket. He wanted to wipe his palms on his pants, but quick hand movement was a bad idea. He wanted to step back, but that would make his body tell a story his mouth could not fix. So he stood there, feeling very human, very breakable, and very far from home. Increase environmental pressure, Voss ordered. The lights dimmed from white to a bruised red. A vibration passed through the floor, too deep to be heard clearly, but strong enough to buzz through Caleb's knees. The Ashma flinched. Not lunged. Flinched. Caleb saw it, and something in his chest tightened. Turn that off, he said. Voss ignored him. Release the scent compound. A faint metallic smell entered the arena vents, sharp and artificial. The Ashma lifted its head and shuddered. Its jaws opened, not in hunger, but distress. Caleb looked up at the observation room, and for the first time his fear had company. Anger. Not hot, not loud, just a steady line drawn somewhere deep inside him. You are stacking the room against her, he said. I am revealing instinct. No, Caleb answered quietly. You are poking a wound and calling the reaction science. That made Voss pause. The professor's eyes narrowed, and every observer seemed to lean in at once. The Ashmaw took one heavy step toward Caleb, then another. Its claws clicked against the steel, slow and deliberate. Caleb remembered his father's hands on a fence rail outside Bozeman, telling him that scared animals ask questions with their bodies before they make decisions with their teeth. Are you danger? Are you escape? Are you pain? Caleb bent his knees slowly, each inch feeling like a gamble he could not afford to lose. Behind the glass, someone whispered that he was collapsing. Voss said there. Submission posture. Caleb almost laughed, but his mouth was too dry. He lowered himself to the floor, not too fast, not too proud, and placed his open hands on his thighs where the Ashmaw could see them. His heart was pounding so hard, he could feel it in his throat. Hey, he said, barely above a breath. I am not the one hurting you. The Ashmaw stopped 3 feet away. Its 4 eyes locked on him. Caleb did not stare back. He looked at the floor near her front paw, at the old scar running beneath her collar, at the tiny tremor in her injured shoulder. The red lights hummed overhead. The artificial scent thickened. Voss said something to the scholars, but Caleb stopped listening. The whole universe had narrowed down to one wounded creature deciding whether this small, pale man on the floor was another part of the trap. Caleb opened his fingers a little wider. Easy, girl, he whispered. Take your time. The Ashmaw did not move for several seconds, and somehow that was worse than a charge. Caleb could hear the air vents above him, the low hum of the arena floor, and his own breathing trying to climb out of control. Behind the glass, Professor Voss spoke in a calm lecture voice, as if the man sitting on the floor was not real enough to interrupt the lesson. Notice the human posture. Lowered height, open hands, reduced eye contact. These are primitive submission cues. Caleb kept his gaze soft and low. He is wrong about you, he whispered. The Ashmaw's ears twitched. Her head lowered another inch, close enough now that Caleb could see tiny silver tracking implants tucked beneath the rough skin near her collar. He did not reach for them. He did not reach for anything. Back in Montana, there was always some new volunteer who wanted to touch the scared dog too soon, prove they were kind too loudly, rush the trust like it was a trick. Caleb had learned the hard way that kindness could be pushy if you made it about yourself. So he sat still. He let the animal choose. The Ashmaw stepped closer. One paw landed beside his boot with enough weight to make the floor tremble. Caleb's right hand wanted to curl into a fist. He forced it open again. That is it, he said softly. No rush. The creature leaned down and sniffed his sleeve. Her breath was hot and damp, carrying a sharp chemical smell that did not belong to any living thing. Sedatives, stimulants, lab sprays, fake blood scent from the vents. Caleb felt sick with it. No wonder she was confused. No wonder she was angry. You poor thing, he murmured. In the observation room, an older scholar made a disturbed sound. It has paused. Voss answered too quickly. Temporary uncertainty. The scent compound will correct it. Caleb heard the words and lifted his eyes just enough to find the professor behind the glass. Do not add anything else. Voss looked almost amused. You are in no position to instruct me. I am the only one in here she is not trying to get away from. That shut down the room for half a second. Then the Ashmaw touched Caleb's bare hand with the side of her nose. Every muscle in him locked. Not visibly, he hoped, but inside he was all alarm bells. Her skin was warmer than he expected, rough at the edges, trembling underneath. Caleb took one slow breath. There you go, he whispered. I hear you. The Ashmaw made a small sound, not a growl this time. It was low, uncertain, almost embarrassing in its softness. The scholars behind the glass stopped taking notes. Mara stood frozen near the back wall, one hand over her mouth. Caleb did not look away from the animal. He noticed the scar under the collar again, a raised line where something had been put in and never meant to come out. His jaw tightened. They hurt you when you do not perform, do they? He said. The Ashmaw blinked all 4 eyes, slow and heavy. Then, with a carefulness that made the whole arena feel smaller, she lowered her massive head into Caleb's lap. The weight nearly knocked the breath out of him. Caleb let his hands hover for a moment, asking permission without words. The creature did not pull back, so he rested one palm lightly against the side of her neck, above the damaged collar, and felt her shaking begin to fade. Professor Voss said nothing. No one did. The most dangerous creature in the Institute had not been conquered, sedated, or commanded. She had simply found the first person in the room who treated her pain like it mattered. For a few seconds, Caleb let the silence do the work. He kept one hand resting lightly near the Ashma's neck and the other flat on his own knee, where she could see it. He did not pet her like a house dog. He did not smile for the room. This was not a cute moment, and he knew it. This was a wounded animal taking the smallest possible chance on a stranger because every familiar hand in her life had taught her to expect pain. Behind the glass, the scholars looked less like experts now and more like people watching a map burn in front of them. Professor Voss stood at the center of it all, too still, his long fingers tight around the edge of his datapad. Caleb looked up at him. "Open the arena door," he said. His voice was low, steady, and tired. "This demonstration is over." Voss did not answer right away. The Ashma shifted her head against Caleb's lap, and the floor gave a soft metallic groan under her weight. Mara Ellison took one careful step forward in the observation room. "Professor," she said, almost whispering, "the council has seen enough." Voss turned his yellow eyes on her. "The council has seen nothing but contamination of data." Caleb felt the Ashma tense under his hand. He lowered his voice. "Easy. Stay with me." Voss lifted the datapad. "Specimen response must be corrected before conclusion." Caleb's face changed then. Not much. Just enough that Mara noticed. He had seen that kind of sentence before, dressed up in clean language to hide an ugly choice. "Professor," Caleb said, "do not press whatever you are about to press." Voss looked down at him through the glass as if Caleb were the unreasonable one. "You came here claiming that compassion changes behavior. Let us determine whether it survives pressure." A soft tone sounded from under the Ashma's collar. The creature jerked away from Caleb's lap and gave a sharp, frightened cry that cut through the arena harder than any roar could have. Caleb moved only as much as he had to, lifting both hands where she could see them. Hey, look at me." The Ashma backed up 2 steps, confused, shaking her head, eyes flashing toward the glass, toward the gate, toward Caleb. The professor had expected rage. He had expected the animal to turn on the nearest living thing and prove his model right. Instead, she looked lost. Caleb's stomach twisted with a cold anger he did not have room to show. "Turn it off," he said. Voss ignored him. Another warning tone began. Caleb raised his voice, not yelling, but sharp enough that every translator caught it clean. "I said turn it off." Mara moved before anyone else did. Her fingers flew across a side console, and the tone stopped. Voss snapped toward her. "Assistant Ellison." "Her heart rate is unstable," Mara said, though her own voice was shaking. Continuing would invalidate the trial. Caleb knew she was lying, or at least bending the truth into something Voss's own rules could not easily crush. He took the opening. "Good call, Mara." The Ashma stared at him from 6 feet away. Caleb slowly lowered himself again, even though his knees wanted to lock and his hands still remembered the sound she had made. "I know," he whispered. "I know. That was not me." The creature's breathing slowed by inches. She stepped forward once, then stopped. Caleb did not reach. He waited. The whole room waited with him. Then the Ashma came back, not to his lap this time, but beside him, placing her body between Caleb and the observation glass. Caleb looked up at Voss and finally understood what scared the professor most. It was not that the beast had trusted a human. It was that, after being hurt again, she still chose him. The moment the Ashma placed herself between Caleb and the glass, the whole institute changed shape. Until then, the arena had been a cage for Caleb. Now it felt like a cage for everyone watching. The scholars understood it before Voss did, or maybe they were just honest enough to show it. One by one, they stepped back from the window. Caleb saw their reflections in the glass, pale and nervous, robes shifting, tablets lowering, mouths going quiet. The deadliest creature in the building had not lost control. That would have been simple. That would have fit their training manuals. She had chosen a side. Professor Voss did not move, but his voice sharpened. "Containment team to primary arena. Non-lethal recovery protocol. Retrieve the human subject, if possible." Caleb heard the last 2 words and felt them settle cold in his stomach. If possible. That was the language of people who had already decided what a life was worth. He slowly stood, keeping one hand near the Ashma's shoulder without gripping her. "Mara," he called, not taking his eyes off the side door. Did he just classify me as a subject? No answer came at first. Then Mara's voice crackled through a private speaker near the floor, quieter than the main system. Caleb, I am trying to override the door, but he has command lock. How many coming in? 6 guards. Shock lances. Sedative rifles. They have been told the animal is unstable. Caleb breathed out through his nose. She is not the unstable one. The side door opened with a soft hydraulic hiss. 6 alien guards entered in a wide line, each wearing white armor with blue institute markings. They moved carefully, but not kindly. Their weapons were held low, which Caleb appreciated, though low still meant ready. The Ashmaw lowered her head and made a deep warning sound that vibrated through the floor. The guard stopped. Caleb lifted his palm. Easy. Stay. She stayed. That was when the room truly went silent. Not because she obeyed like a trained pet. She did not. She stayed because Caleb had asked in a voice that expected her to understand, and somehow, impossibly, she did. One guard looked up at the observation glass. Professor, the specimen is responding to human vocal patterning. Voss snapped. Proceed. Caleb turned his head slightly, just enough for the guards to hear him without looking away from the Ashmaw. Nobody needs to get hurt today. Back out. Close the door, and let the independent inspectors look at her medical file. The lead guard hesitated. He was broad, green-skinned, with a heavy jaw and eyes that flicked from Caleb to the Ashmaw and back again. Caleb could see the doubt forming there. Good. Doubt was room to breathe. You do not understand, the guard said. That creature is a Class 7 hazard. Caleb nodded once. Then why is she the calmest one in the room? The question landed harder than a shout. Even the guards knew it was true. The Ashmaw stood steady at Caleb's side, shaking only when the collar lights flickered under her skin. Caleb looked up at Voss, and his voice dropped into something flat and dangerous. Turn the collar off, Professor. Not down. Off. Voss gave a small, bitter laugh. You mistake attachment for control. No, Caleb said. You mistake pain for authority. Mara's voice came again, lower this time, rushed and scared. Caleb, I found files. There are more animals. More trials. He changed your waiver after you signed it. Caleb closed his eyes for half a second. There it was. The thing he had felt in the hallway, the ugly shape under all the clean words. When he opened his eyes, the fear was still there, because fear did not vanish just because a man got angry. But now it had direction. He looked at the guards. You all heard that. The lead guard did not answer. Voss did. Cut the arena audio. But Mara was faster. Every screen in the observation chamber flashed from live telemetry to archived medical files, trial logs, and redacted signatures. The scholars stared. The guards turned. Professor Voss finally looked afraid, not of the Ashmaw, and not of Caleb, but of the truth getting out of its cage. The screens did not show a monster. They showed a pattern. Trial after trial, file after file, all stamped with the clean blue seal of the Voss Institute and buried under words that made cruelty sound professional. Behavioral correction. Stress conditioning. Predatory refinement. Caleb stood in the arena with the Ashmaw breathing beside him and watched the scholars finally see what had been happening in the rooms they had politely avoided. Mara's voice came through the speaker, thin but steady now. The medical records were sealed under professor-level authorization. There are neural collars, stimulant cycles, pain compliance logs, and altered consent forms. Caleb, your file was changed after you entered the lift. Caleb looked up at the observation glass. Put it on every screen. Voss turned so fast his robe snapped around his legs. Assistant Ellison, you will stop this immediately. No, Mara said. One word. Small, scared, and still the bravest thing anyone in that room had said all day. The central display changed again, and Caleb saw the Ashmaw's scan. A fractured shoulder that had never been allowed to heal. Inflamed tissue under the collar. Repeated forced exposure sessions. No name anywhere. Just specimen K9, again and again, like a living creature became easier to hurt once no one had to call her anything. Caleb felt the anger rise in him, but he kept his hand still on the Ashmaw's shoulder. She was watching him now, not the guards, not Voss, him. If he lost control, she might think the room had become dangerous again. So he swallowed the heat in his throat and spoke quietly. Mara, does she have an intake origin? The assistant clicked through the files. Karen 9 Rescue Zone. Juvenile female. collected after a mining collapse. No aggressive record before transfer. One of the council scholars stepped closer to the glass. That is impossible. Voss reported her as a natural apex hazard. Caleb gave a tired little nod. Sure he did. Voss raised his voice, but it cracked at the edge. You are all being manipulated by human projection. That animal is not injured in the moral sense. It is reactive material. It has no civic status, no legal standing, no recognized personhood. Caleb looked at the Ashmaw, at the scar beneath her collar, at the way she kept leaning toward his hand like the whole world might disappear if he moved away. I'm not asking whether she can vote, Professor. His voice stayed calm, but every word landed clean. I'm asking why you had to hurt her to prove she was dangerous. Nobody answered. Even the guards seemed smaller inside their armor. Mara opened another channel, and this time her voice carried beyond the observation room. External Archive Mirror Active. Earth Liaison Office, Interstellar Ethics Board, and Council Emergency Review have received the complete packet. Voss stared at her as if she had opened an airlock. You have ended your career. Maybe, Mara said. But I am done pretending not to see things. The Ashmaw shifted, pressing closer to Caleb's side. He looked toward the lead guard. Take the collar offline. The guard glanced at Voss, then at the files still rolling across the walls. For the first time, he did not ask permission. He lowered his weapon, walked to the side console, and entered a command. The blue lights under the Ashmaw's skin faded to black. She sagged with relief, so sudden Caleb had to brace himself against her weight. Easy, he whispered, his own voice rough now. You are still here. Above them, alarms began to pulse softly through the Institute. Not containment alarms. Arrival alerts. Someone outside had finally started listening. Voss looked down at Caleb Walker, the human he had meant to embarrass, and saw a man sitting beside the proof of everything he had done. Caleb met his eyes through the glass and said, You built a cage and called it science. Now stay in it. The arrival alerts grew louder, soft at first, then steady enough that every person in the observation room knew the building was no longer answering only to Professor Voss. The emergency doors above the arena opened, and a group of interstellar ethics officers entered with Earth liaison badges glowing on their collars. They did not rush. They did not shout. That made it worse for Voss. Panic still would have given him something to argue with. Procedure gave him nowhere to hide. Caleb stayed on the floor beside the Ashmaw, one hand resting near her shoulder, feeling her breathe without the collar humming under her skin. She was exhausted. He could see it now that the lights had softened and the artificial scent had cleared from the vents. Not broken, not harmless, just tired in the way living things get tired when they spend too long being treated like a problem. Mara came down from the observation level with two officers beside her. Her hands were still shaking, but she kept her chin up. Caleb looked at her and gave a small nod. You did good, he said. Mara let out a breath that almost became a laugh. I was scared. That still counts. Across the glass, Professor Voss was being questioned by the review board. His voice had lost its smooth lecture rhythm. He kept pointing at the files, at Caleb, at the Ashmaw, trying to turn the truth back into a debate. But the room had already changed. The scholars who had applauded him that morning would not meet his eyes. The guards who had followed his orders stood with their weapons lowered. The council observers were no longer taking notes about human weakness. They were taking statements about institutional failure. An Earth liaison, a woman named Captain Rebecca Hale, stepped into the arena and stopped at a respectful distance. Her eyes moved from Caleb to the Ashmaw and back again. Mr. Walker, medical team is ready. For both of you. Caleb looked down at his sleeve, still damp from the creature's breath, and realized his hands were trembling now that the danger had passed. Take her first. Hale nodded like she had expected that. We will. The Ashmaw lifted her head when the medics approached, uneasy but not hostile. Caleb leaned close, keeping his voice low and plain. They are here to help. I will stay where you can see me. No one laughed this time. No one called it sentimentality. The medics moved slowly, and the Ashmaw allowed it. Not because she trusted uniforms or science or laws, but because she trusted the one human who had not asked her to become less afraid before proving she deserved kindness. Hours later, when the Institute was locked down and Voss's name had already begun disappearing from official banners, Caleb sat in a quiet recovery room with a blanket over his shoulders and a cup of bad station coffee warming his hands. Mara stood in the doorway. They asked what you did to control her, she said. Caleb stared into the cup for a moment. He thought about every creature he had ever met that had been called mean before anyone asked what happened to it. He thought about people too. Neighbors, veterans, kids in trouble, strangers on the worst day of their lives. How often the world demanded calm from the wounded while excusing the hand that made the wound. Finally, he said, I did not control her. I stopped adding to the fear. Mara looked through the glass wall at the Ashma sleeping in the next room, her chest rising and falling under a thermal blanket built for something much larger than a human hospital bed. That sounds too simple. Caleb gave a tired smile. Most decent things do. A week later, the council issued a new contact advisory for all facilities handling Earth personnel. It was only one line, tucked beneath pages of policy, but it spread farther than any speech Voss had ever given. Never mistake human compassion for weakness. Some species dominate what they fear. Humans have a more dangerous habit. They sit down beside it, learn its name, and make it family. And somewhere in a quiet rehabilitation habitat under softer lights, the creature once known only as Specimen K9 opened her eyes when Caleb walked in, crossed the room without fear, and rested her head against his knee like she had finally found the one place in the galaxy where nobody expected her to be a monster.